After a somewhat crazy beginning to the semester, I'm finally settling down to make the follow-up video to the last video that I posted on what we might call the objective side of logos. That is, logos in things out there in the world. In this video, what I want to do is talk about the subjective side of logos. That is, logos in us. Philosophers often try to describe that objective side of logos with the word intelligibility, the structure of things in themselves, independent of any observer. Whereas we could use the word intelligence to describe the logos that is in us, that subjective side, the thing in us that's capable of recognizing those structures. And understanding the difference between intelligence and intelligibility will be crucial for understanding this key word in Greek philosophy. On the objective side, we have translations of the word logos, such as organizational principle or structure or ratio. On the subjective side, we frequently have translations such as reason or mind or rationality. We could give a rough stab at defining the relationship between these two sides by saying that the subjective logos, the logos in us, is the faculty for being receptive to logos in the world. One of the basic intuitions of that group of worldviews that we might call broadly Platonism or metaphysically realist is that the objective side of logos is really out there in the world, independent of the subjective side of logos. We're not projecting meaning or structure onto the world. Instead, that structure is already there, and we are coming along and discovering it with that faculty for understanding that we have. In other words, we are receptive to something that was already there. We're discovering rather than inventing the meaning that's in the world. We could use the example from last time of an icon that has structural relations between eyes and hands and lips and the background elements and the thing that the saint is holding in the icon. Those structural relations are in the icon itself. And those structural relationships between all those different parts of the icon would be there even if we turned off the lights and everybody left the room and there was no observer there to see it at all. The icon would still have the structure that it has. But when we walk into the room, we flip on the lights, we look at the icon, we discover those elements and we see the meaningful relationship that they have all to each other. And to do that, we use our mind, that is our logos in us. The alternative view, the idea that those meaningful relationships only exist in the eye of the beholder, or that our mind somehow projects this meaning onto reality, we might broadly call the view subjectivism. Admittedly, the icon example allows for a possible confusion, but I did that on purpose because I hope that it will illustrate a key point or a key distinction that we want to make in this discussion. The icon, of course, was produced by an intelligent artist. Someone sat down at some point and they know how eyes and ears and nose and mouth and hands go together, and so they produced that structure on the surface of the icon. Okay, so we could say that in that sense that intelligence, in this case human intelligence, causes the logos in the icon. So you might think that that's what the subjectivist means when he says that our human intelligence causes the intelligibility that's out there in the world, that we cause it in the same way that the iconographer causes the structure of the icon. But of course, that would be a confusion. The kind of causality involved when the iconographer creates the structure in the icon is efficient causality. The iconographer is producing an artifact. Whereas what the subjectivist means is that it's our mind that is projecting meaning out onto the world. That it's our consciousness in the moment that is causing and is the source of all of that intelligible structure, all of that organization, all of that meaning. We could also use the example of DNA to illustrate this principle. We ourselves, as human beings, as a living organism, we have something that causes our structure, that causes my hands to grow in this particular way and my eyes to be situated right here on my face and for all my organs to function in the way that they function. And we now know today what that original organizing principle is. The thing that encodes that information is DNA. Now, in one sense, the parents of every child cause the DNA that comes to exist in the child. But they cause that in the sense of efficient causality. The parents produce the DNA that then comes to exist in the child. But of course, after that, the parents could die, they could go away, they could no longer be involved with the child. The child still has the DNA now inside of them, objectively. It's not the mind of the parents that's simply making up how the DNA of the child will be in the moment, in the way that the subjectivist needs. Now, in the history of philosophy, the battle between the subjectivists and the realists has been raging for millennia. It's actually a mistake to think that this is somehow unique to modern philosophy. Even back in Plato's day, Plato was dealing with people like Protagoras, who said that man is the measure of all things. This is really nothing new, and I don't think that we can settle these arguments right here in a short video. In fact, the arguments between these two sides are almost impossible to solve, and the reason is really rather simple. Because this disagreement about the nature of human experience strikes right at the heart of everything that we have as evidence, because we don't have any evidence outside of our experience. And so the way that we interpret our experience, whether our mind is constituting that experience or whether that experience is being given to us by the world, that is something that strikes right at the root of all the possible premises for a coherent argument. So if I am talking to a completely thoroughgoing subjectivist, it's going to be very, very hard for me to find premises that that person will agree with and will somehow establish or prove from absolute first principles the Platonic conviction that I have that I'm not inventing the structure of the world. In fact, I'm discovering it. Fortunately, however, I don't usually encounter any thoroughgoing subjectivists. Usually, people are quite selective in what they're subjectivists about. They admit that there is some sort of objective structure for DNA. They admit that there's subjective structure for other scientific things or physical things. But then they suddenly switch to subjectivism when it comes to things like spirituality or morality, ethics, beauty, our aesthetic experience of the world. They want to say, no. The sunset isn't objectively beautiful. Beauty isn't a intelligible, meaningful reality that's there in the sunset. Instead, we just came along and as human beings that have eyes that happen to see certain colors, we happen to find certain arrangements of colors pleasing. So we're projecting that beauty onto the sunset. But that's okay, because for our present purposes, we can just leave all of those controversial examples to one side for the moment and just focus on the cases that such people admit. So, for instance, take a basic scientific example. Consider a water molecule. A water molecule has a basic structure. It's made of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. That arrangement, that ratio of hydrogen to oxygen in a particular way with particular molecular bonds, that is the logos of water. And it's very rare that I meet a person who thinks that that structure is something that human beings simply projected onto the world. Typically, they're going to admit that that is something real. And that's all I need to get the basic point across. This basic clarification of terms should help us understand a crucial point that we find throughout ancient and medieval philosophy. Across multiple schools, whether it's Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, or Christian, we find philosophers asserting that one of the things that makes human beings special, that differentiates us from other animals, is that we are logikos, that man, as Aristotle put it, man is a rational animal. Now, logikos, we have that root, logos, in there, that we are logical. we are the kinds of beings, and part of our place in the universe is that we are here in part to recognize the logos of things. That's part of our job description, so to speak. And it's hard to understand what they meant by that if you think like a subjectivist.